This is called Starting Again. It's a Vbook. You may wonder what that is. It is to that of what is a vlog, which is a video blog. But in this case, I was set for publishing a book this summer, and instead I said, you know what? I found myself continuing to struggle with making progress about 10 to 15 pages in. And I said, you know what? I have to speak my truth on this as I continue to find myself being delayed with making progress working on this book. So I said, you know what? I'm going to do something that I'm not sure has ever existed, and it is called a Vbook. So this is a video book, me sharing what would otherwise be within Starting Again, the book. My first book was called The Burnt Out Story. You could find that on Amazon as well. That was necessary in order for Starting Again to exist. For those that don't know, what you see on the board here refers to reliving, or at least revisiting, parts of my life I did not know I needed to address until after graduating with a master's in counselor education in 2021. So while you see 2021 right above, it's a bittersweet time, as there's a few things going on that I didn't always share what I realized is necessary for me to share in Starting Again, the book itself. So in the event that the book itself doesn't get published, just know that this is the closest thing to that. Now you may wonder, why am I referring back to 2021 when it comes to Starting Again, 4 years ago? Well, it refers to upon graduating and going to California with a close friend of mine and being there and just pondering on what I needed to address upon returning. From there, I had realized it was essential for me to write about life since graduating high school. That would influence my journey to writing the Burnt Out Story. If it wasn't for the Burnt Out Story, who knows how far I would have went down the road without struggling to deal with my past in a way that I would hope others would give themselves a chance of addressing. So, since you are here, it is only fair for me to share this time in which we have. So, if there's any comments in which you put, hello everybody, I appreciate everyone for being here. Whenever I upload these, for some reason, the comments don't stick, but I tell you what, this is going to be worth your time, because this is something that I feel like, speaking our truth, we need this now more than ever, especially with the push for AI, where it's understandable that you may not know what is real or fake anymore. What I tell you what, clean and real like stainless steel. The best way for us to pay homage to our lineage is through breaking chains of generational pain, and me putting myself out there in a way that normally I don't, because I keep to myself like a rogue in stealth. So the book, if you're wondering, refers to Starting Again. So 2021, this is probably going to be an hour video or until my battery phone dies. But I just want to get straight into this. So upon going to California and coming back, there was a lot of things in which I realized I needed to attend to sooner, while also at the same time a part of me was willing to let go a, a series of past events that would help me be more willing to settle down. Yet what I didn't realize was God didn't want me to settle down quite as I thought I was going to. And that was a humble lesson, which is part of what leads to Starting Again. So going into 2021 further, when I was at California just pondering, because I had poison ivy from doing a 10K 2 days before getting on the trip there, and I couldn't do as much as I had set out to do. It was meant to be in that moment because I needed to do some further reflecting that like I said, I didn't know I needed to until I got away from everything that was going on in the other state. But once I came back, I said, you know what? I got to give myself a chance. So I was like, what I'm going to do is I'm going to spend my birthday week, or at least the week of my birthday in August, going to New Jersey, figuring out a place where I was going to stay for however long it was going to be for me to write this thing, which was called The Burnt Out Story. It's on Amazon right now. I published it in 2022, but it was just a concept of me giving myself some space for me to write something that I did not know I needed to address who knows how many years prior. And that's why starting again is so essential. But I found a place in which I figured out that was in Highland Lakes, New Jersey, that I ultimately decided upon returning to New Jersey the same month, August 2021, and how I was going to start this journey. And while even though I thought I was going to write the book in 1 month, I did not know it was going to take me a full year. But what I also did not realize was how who I thought would be a future significant other upon meeting them at Bible study instead would be a life lesson I continue to learn from today. And you will get why as I continue throughout this. So I didn't know at the time that going back and forth from New Jersey to Connecticut multiple times, how it was unhealthy, and I dismissed certain signs of why I should have considered what I share with students now, the value of acquaintance before friendship, friendship before relationship. And so with that in mind, that's something where like I said, the Lord was humbling me in ways I did not know. And I dismissed that on behalf of returning from New Jersey in September or returning in October, excuse me, but entertaining something that I should not have entertained. And there's a quote that I share with students, and this is where that refers back to. The red flags in which I accepted in myself were the same red flags I accepted in them. And I didn't know how much I needed to attend to that until moving onwards, which you will hear more about throughout some of these years that you see posted on the board. All the while, when I came back, I was also in the midst of what's called RCIA, now called OCIA, Order of Christian Initiation of Adults, which back then it was Rite of Christian Initiation of Adults to get baptized in 2022. So the way in which this would be is when I came back from Jersey, I was looking for apartments, as I already had 2 apartments prior. One where I in 2015 received an associate's degree, transferred to my other Costco job near that school at the time, and so much going on then, but how I managed to persevere through that. And then when I had left my apartment with dual residence in my hometown and running for office, how that would be of a thing. Yet it would be only a reminder of why I needed to have space to myself to accomplish the additional things in my life that were not otherwise possible prior. So that was the second time. And then, although right now I'm at my third apartment, it's the fact that when I came back from Jersey and I was looking for another place, what I was not entirely processing then, as there were just so many things going on, and it was fair for who my partner was then, and she had said this to me, and it did make sense. She said, what's the point of us being together if you're gonna have your own apartment? And like I said, it made sense at the time, and I didn't initially consider how cohabitating could have led me to further sinning and just ruining parts of my future, even though certain areas may not have seemed like that at the time. So when I was doing RCIA, here's the lineup for how the week would go. So on Sundays, I would go to work early in the morning, get out, go to church, after church, do the RCIA. By then, it was like close to noon. But meanwhile, there'd be some back and forth between me and my partner then. And I dismissed it as much as I did because I figured conflict was the norm. But what I didn't realize is, hey, what's going on, the guy? I appreciate you for being here as well. But one of the things that I didn't realize at that time was the me being so accustomed to conflict. ROTC is separate from RCIA. ROTC, I think, is something military based, but RCIA referred to me going through a series of events that are required to eventually get baptized down the road. So it's just being in the grace of having that opportunity. But there was just certain things, like I said, the conflicts that I was dismissing because I was so accustomed to conflicts growing up. And that was a red flag within myself that I did not know I needed to attend to until years later. So I would go to work, come back, work on the Burnt Out Story, which at that time was a blog. And when I was in Jersey, I ended up putting that into a blog because if I didn't, there's no way I would have been able to make some additional progress moving forward onto that. Why is this important? Well, it was the incremental progress made along the way that allowed me to actually have a chance to advance parts of my life that I was subconsciously trying to acquire with that education that I received along the way. Nor did I imagine it would be 9 years of college in addition to all the other schooling I had prior. Going into 2022, there were some things in which I was trying to keep afloat, thinking everything was going to hash itself out. Baptism was one of a kind. As I mentioned in the Burnt Out Story, it almost felt like baptism was more important than when I received my master's in counselor education. But ultimately, I know, as silly as it may sound, that I had to have a master's in counselor education in order for me to be within the position that I would accept going through RCIA to eventually getting baptized. I didn't know how many areas of my life I needed to address until I applied that counselor education to my individual self before the concept of applying it to other people's lives instead. So going throughout 2022, after publishing the Burnt Out Story in the summer, I ultimately left my 10-year job with Costco's, and then I would set out to eventually work remote with United Way 211, and then from there, I would eventually work with Amazon. And then while working at Amazon, the state called me, and then I ended up working with the Department of Social Services. So it was a blessing to have those experiences, but there were some things in which I quickly realized. One is such when I was with United Way 211, where there was a certain thing going on behind the scenes that is not entirely being shared. That's why speaking our truth is so important, especially in 2025. A lot more people have a story to share, whether they realize it or not. It's just all about giving ourselves a chance, rather than just suffering in silence. What I realized was the call wait times were more important than the actual conversations being had, which is unfair to the caller themselves, as I realized there was more than one thing going on at a time. Well, ultimately, the in-depth conversations being had were part of why they did not want me there, which is whatever. And then when I was working for the state, what I realized was there's a certain way that the system is in place that going in there wanting to do good, not saying anything bad about anybody that works there. But what I realized was there were certain areas that needed to be attended to, just like when I ran for office in 2017. And so I was trying to implement a life coach program for anybody receiving state assistance. And ultimately, they were like, Joe, that's just not how the system operates. And once I realized that, I told myself, I got to get out of here. And I got to do something different. Because if I don't, then I know I'm going to continue to be miserable. At this time, it was 2023. So we're making progress here. So in 2023, I was with the state. but I had shared with my girlfriend at that time why I wanted to look for a different job. And to them, because it was the concept of working for the state and being such a good job, that it would be illogical for me to leave. But the reality is, they were not in my shoes to experience what it is that I was going through, nor did they have the same mindset as I had with wanting to make a difference to the level and ways in which I operate that I realize are different than many. And so that became part of an ultimatum later on into 2023, where I ultimately ended up getting engaged, and things were, I was trying my best to let things hash themselves out within the relationship, hoping things would get better, hoping people would change, which is part of why I tell people acquaintance before friendship, friendship before relationship, and what distinguishes those things are boundaries. Because if you try to rush that process, like they say, haste makes waste. And when you continue to put yourself further in a hole, ultimately you realize at some point that you got to start making progress outside of that. Because if you don't, then you're just going to put yourself in a pit of despair on behalf of someone else who will aid you in that unfortunate journey. So there came a time, which by now was my second time moving out of their place, where I dismissed the red flags as I was so accustomed to living all over the place and just being a product of my environment, not realizing that there was parts that continued to need to be addressed, and not realizing why it needed to be addressed sooner, which was my fault for not giving that the space that it needed, just like in the beginning, instead of just rushing the process of what seemed like a very quick friendship into a relationship, or even in the context of jumping from acquaintance into relationship, and how detrimental that would be to other parts of my life. Because I know if I did not entertain that, I would be in a different position than I am right now. But the fact is, I can't change parts of the past, which is why starting again is the title, because it all refers back to me being in the position I am now in a very interesting way, where it almost feels as if I'm in 2021. Yet the difference is I'm not making the same mistakes as I made prior. And even though it's one of those concepts of how we wish we knew what we knew prior now, it's just the reality is the best way to move forward is not to repeat the same mistakes. So then there would come a time when I ultimately had a dilemma where people didn't realize, do I put up with this situation or do I get out of it? And it's one of those things where if anybody has ever been in a relationship and they invested so much into it that they felt like they spent too much, whether it was time, money, whatever finite resource they were also putting into it, it's the concept of why they didn't want to let it go. But there was something that dawned on me when it was nearing the end of that relationship, as we were also set to get married in September of 2024. And like I said, this was happening around December of 2023. But there was a concept that hit me, and I'm grateful that I received this when I did. And it was the fact of how someday there would be a possibility, if I had children with them, that my kids, let's say teenagers, would witness the continuous red flags that they would see me accept on behalf of what I was continually addressing on my own behalf, would be this. And I don't have an answer for this question, in which I know someday my kids would ask me. And it is, why would you choose to settle down with who would have been supposedly their mother, knowing what I knew prior? Because ultimately what they would take away from that is, well, if our father is willing to accept these red flags in our mother, then it is okay for us to accept this in our potential partners. And the last thing I would ever want for my future offspring is for them to suffer on behalf of my recklessness and me not taking the steps necessary before they came into this world, so then they wouldn't have to experience unnecessary headaches that I was continuously experiencing on a daily basis. I know you didn't probably expect to hear any coping mechanisms. I'll share one with you right now. So as I was going to bed every night, where there's arguing happening non-stop, and I was just struggling to go to sleep. So I was closing my eyes, but my mind was running faster than the speedometer on a car could go. And I was just trying to sleep, but I couldn't. And so many days, I was just waking up and I just felt drained, even though I had my eyes closed. It was just the fact that my mind could not be at rest. So the coping mechanism was this. So I would close my eyes, and then within a few minutes, if I couldn't go to sleep, what I would do is I would open my eyes and I would just look around, like left, right, just take a deep breath in, exhale, and then I'd go back, close my eyes. Give it a few more minutes. And then if that still happened again, I would open my eyes and I would try it again. Why? Because ultimately I was resetting the mindset that I would have going to sleep. And that helped me after a week or so, or not less than a week, because I was starting to get sleep and I didn't know how useful this coping mechanism would help me get through what in a sense would be torture, and as some would say, if they knew behind the scenes, a nightmare. I didn't know things would get as bad as what they did until there would become a time where I realized we weren't going to pass pre-Cana. And so there was the reality of having pre-Cana before the marriage or before the wedding at the church. And so we were set to have a hybrid pre-Cana class setup where it's like a 6-month wedding course that you and your partner end up going through, and then the priest or the deacon see, is this a good fit? And once I started connecting the dots, and I had discovered somehow, not sooner, yet, better later than never, the fact that we weren't going to pass pre-Cana. And then the concept of it being hybrid, I already knew, just like you're seeing this recording now, that is, if you were receiving this on a laptop, that if I was, or if me and them were here, and let's say you're taking this in, as if I see you and you're the priest and you're asking questions, I knew that if let's say you were the priest and you were asking questions about us, and they said something that was not true, I would call them out on it, and that's just who I am. And I know from previous arguments, which is just so unnecessary to the point where their cat would end up running away, and at times even coming to me instead of going to them, because I'm not I'm not I'm not there for the drama. I have a no nonsense counseling approach. However, this stuff was going on much more than people realize behind the scenes. But it was just a reminder of how my childhood taught me ways in which how to keep things under control despite their fires going on behind the scenes, especially with being unable to be present, especially when the past is captivated by constant trauma. It's like the notion of post-traumatic stress disorder, which that relationship definitely contributed in certain ways, which I'm grateful to have addressed. Anyways, I realized that if in the event I had called them out on whatever nonsense in which they were trying to cover up, I would call them out on it. And what people don't realize is if you're doing something hybrid, all they have to do is either pause or close the laptop, and then a fight is going to start. And I'm not here for it. I don't have time for the drama. Drama is nonsense. It's toxicity. It's bad business. And that was just something that they weren't grasping, even though they were a few years older than me. Just like I tell people, just because somebody's a few years older than you doesn't mean that they're more mature than you, especially when it comes to getting certain business done. So once I had made that realization, I realized it was best for us to no longer be intimate. And that was something in which they did not appreciate. So then there would come a time when one morning I woke up uh, like 2 hours before then. I went downstairs or in the basement. I was exercising. And then I went up at like 7 o'clock to see if they needed anything, as they had previously went through a procedure, and I tried my best to be there as much as I could. And I'm grateful for how present I was with them throughout all of it, thinking that we could move forward from all of that was going on. And what I realized was all of the things I dismissed upon getting to know them the first time that we met, or the second time that we met, because we ended up meeting at the Bible study, but we ended up hanging out at the park later that week or the week after. I know it was within a short period of time, because I met them in between the times in which I went to Jersey. So I went to Jersey in the start of August, and I went to Jersey at the end of August, and I just so happened to meet them in the middle. And I thought, because of me where I met them and the way everything was happening within the time frame, I thought it was meant to be. I thought it was synchronicity, not realizing it was just a life lesson that God wanted me to receive at that time, where I thought I was ready to settle down, especially as I told previous relationships that I wanted to finish school before settling down. So even though I wanted to settle down, it was just God telling me that what I thought was the right person was not, because it was my perspective of who it is I thought it was supposed to be, and not God's perspective on who it is that I was supposed to be with. In a sense, I had the right intentions. It just ultimately I rushed things, and that's on me. But getting back to the day in which I officially said it's all over was upon going up at 7 o'clock. Said, do you need any medicine? Do you need anything? And then what happens is they snapped, and that was something that I was not ready for, and I knew the situation was real when I went to them and to the bed, see if they needed anything, and they were upset because they knew that everything was basically coming to an end. And by now, like I said, I already moved out twice and then came back, but this time would be the final straw, as they were starting to get confrontational. And while, as I said at the start of this, I've been accustomed to conflict my whole life, and this time, this was really something where God was testing me in a situation where the last thing I wanted to do is get in any trouble or ruin parts of my life that I've worked so hard to build. And once I realized, just like our eyes lock in here like this, that once their eyes went from looking here to their eyes over there, thinking that they're seeing straight at here, that's when I said that's when in my head, in that moment, all the red flags that I dismissed immediately came to the forefront of my mind. And I said, wow, like I have to get out of here. Because if they're getting in my face, but they're not even looking in my face, I said, this is not something that I can entertain anymore. So I left, I went to work early, and then I had made reservations with U-Haul, which U-Haul already knew me very well, as I had storage units prior, which I could upload on photos down the road sometime this week, either with this or in a post attached to this. And I had to get everything ready to go because I had to get out of there, not knowing how bad things were going to get. I had dismissed the concept of all the times in which the police have been involved in their previous relationships, and me thinking it was everybody else but them, not realizing that there was a lot more going on behind the scenes than I was willing to acknowledge, and also more than they were willing to acknowledge themselves. But what I realized is, just because you're willing to address your red flags doesn't mean others are willing to address their red flags as well. That's why the acquaintance part is so important, because if you don't, when the time comes, it's not going to be how you think it's going to go. And that's something that I don't wish that on anybody. So that was coming at the December of 2023. And I was already so fed up with my job, not with the workers there, but just the concept of us seeing people suffer, fall into the same holes, and nothing being done about it, to the context of filling those holes, fixing the system, and ultimately leading people to the peace and prosperity in which I know they deserved, as I too once relied on state assistance. And without the state assistance, who knows if I'd be here today. So I have a saying: the best way for us to pay homage to our lineage is through breaking chains of generational pain, and to reduce that from being passed on to the next generation, even if it's not of my family, is the concept of reducing the suffering and the headaches that future generations have to experience on behalf of their parents or whoever brought them into this world, and whoever brought those parents into the world as well. Because trauma dumping could very easily happen amongst the generations, whether parents realize it or not. It's an unfortunate situation, especially as environment can have an influence on our psyche. A great example is, even though we're in this room, this video could very much be influenced if there was a dog barking outside. That's just another influence within the variables of this environment. Anyways, so within my first week, thank God also, this was another reminder of some healing that happened in areas of my life I didn't know it had to happen as such as this. I praise the Lord for my family and how they, in sense, came together through me living multiple places, yet with their support, and how I needed that in ways where, although I was often stubborn in my life, not accepting help on behalf of others, it came to a point where the Lord put me in a position where the only way in which I could get out of that situation that I was in was through accepting their support. As I spent thousands on the wedding ring, I spent thousands on the relationship, I put myself into debt. I did so many things trying to keep that relationship afloat, not to make it look like there was egg on my face. But what I realized was I was only putting myself in a further hole. So, rebuilding life in 2024 is only just a word. And I didn't know to the context of how intense it was going to be, but I knew it was better than staying in that situation. While she has a very nice place, it's the concept that somehow, as nice as that place may look on the outside, somehow on the inside, I felt like it was worse than as if I lived in a dumpster. And that was just because of the constant arguing, the fighting. Just it's so it's so unnecessary, and people don't realize how much that can take away from your soul, especially with them being Catholic, me becoming Catholic, Catholic convert as they call, and just trying to build up life from there. But there were so many things, like I said, the red flags in which I dismissed in them were also things in which I dismissed in myself, because I had yet to address those areas as I have addressed them now, which I praise the Lord that I've been able to. So going into 2024, on the first week, I quit my state job. That was one of those things that was also held over my head, where if I had left my state job, that they would end the relationship. And that's just something that I don't respect in another person, for them knowing I want to look for other places, I want to look for other jobs while working for the state, and them not supporting that. And that's an area where I don't know how often it's discussed, but I'll share it now. This may sound harsh, but it's better to be truthful than to lie, because when we lie, we're false programming our mind to remember things that aren't even real. Then down the road, you start to question, how much life have you really lived if most of it has been living a lie, or secrecies, or scandals, any form of nonsense. It's toxic. But because of them holding that over me, that's when I realized, especially for how many times I felt like God just saying, like, find it in your heart to forgive, find it in your heart to forgive. And what I realized was I couldn't do that anymore. It felt like my soul was diminishing. And this right here is going to be like $1 million statement. A lack of faith is disrespect, and that's something in which, as a man, I cannot accept. And for them not to accept that is something that I realized it was better for us to distance ourselves, especially as I wanted nothing to do with it. But the reality was I was still on the hook for some of the bills there, even though I wasn't there. And I was willing to hash out some of that stuff for the time being rather than them go without internet and some other bills there. It was just, I just didn't want to be in that environment because I seen the direction in which that environment was going in. And even though we had different upbringings, I have realized that there were certain things that I had accepted in my childhood into adulthood without realizing I needed to address that would become apparent in that relationship. Which is why, and I'll tell you this now, which I wish I realized then, is any relationship where there's constant conflict, don't entertain. Just get yourself out of that situation. The sooner you do that, the happier you're going to be. Not happier because you're not going to be around that person, but it's just the fact that you're not going to be entertaining that nonsense. So going forward into 2024, I had some odd and, well, I'd say odd end jobs, but it was just the fact that I did some server work. I had a chance to be a mentor, which was wonderful. But one of the things a lot of people don't realize is, so I had a 401k, and during the pandemic, I took out 10,000 and I put that towards my student loans, at least to put a chip in it, because I was about halfway trying to pay it off as we speak. But I somehow forgot about the 401k. But what I didn't realize was, not until at least I remember that I had it, is that how I almost withdrew the remaining 401k, which the taxes and all of that, they don't even tell you. It's like 20-30% out of all of that comes out. And that was just, that really took a hit, but I know I had to give myself a second chance in the situation. So I almost took out the 401k to pay off more of the wedding, as there was we spent a third, well, between what I put in and then what we received upon the engagement from the family towards the wedding, that I was going to just pay it all off so it would be taken care of before the September of 2024. But good thing I didn't, because ultimately there is no refund on that, nor is there a refund on the tickets that we went 50-50 on to go to Florida at some point. That's just, in a sense, it's like water under the bridge. Anyways, going into 2024 and withdrawing from my 401k that spring, that was the best way of giving myself a second chance. And I didn't know how much I needed that until the time in which I actually went through with it. That would, in a way, complement the journey in which I am on now. One where I could be in a position, to the extent as a substitute teacher for middle school and high school, to pass on some life lessons gained along the way to future generations in hopes of reducing the headaches they experience long term. That's what leads us to starting again in 2025. It's the reconciliation in which I've been able to receive since that of 2021, and how it is best for me to do do according to God rather than just do according to what I innately thought is best for myself. Because if I had listened to God sooner, I would have considered acquaintance far, far more. I would have waited more rather than just springing ahead into the relationship. But I dismissed the times where my gut instinct was saying get out of the situation, because I thought I knew what was best. But the truth is, when your gut is telling you something, listen to your gut, because the last thing you want to do is put your intuition to shame. And I don't wish my situation on anybody. But the reality is sometimes these things happen. And it's important for you to realize when you're in that situation. So then you can start to figure out how do you get yourself out of it so you don't continue to go down what may seem like a point of no return. And that's just about what 2025 has been. It's about capping on what has been a unique year, but necessary, and a reminder of all the efforts put forth for 2024 onwards. But I'd also be lying if I said if it wasn't for Bible study, if it wasn't for YCP, Young Catholic Professionals, and their events, if it wasn't for going to church, if it wasn't for the close friends I have, if it wasn't for the family I have, who knows how much progress I would have made along the way. As Bible study would lead me to, in the first week of January 2024, attending a Young Catholic Professional event where the speaker mentioned the importance of attending church on a regular basis. And that was something that I was interested in doing in 2023, but my work schedule was a conflict at that time. And I didn't know how much of an issue all of that would be, even though I would have thought I I would have received some, it would have been more supportive for me to do that rather than just go once a week if I could. Rather, when possible, could I go? Which would lead me to finding the home parish in which I am at now. And through that journey of trying to find a church that offers Mass on a regular basis, I would start to integrate God in my life more. And believe in it's understandable if you don't know this right now, but it just so happens that in 2024, Valentine's Day was also Ash Wednesday. And that's when it dawned on me that if I had a better relationship with Jesus, I would have been more aware of certain things around me that I needed to attend. And for anyone who thinks that getting counseling, you're weak for seeking it out, I got a perfect example for you. So while working for the state, you receive 3 free counseling sessions. Within those 3 free counseling sessions, it's up to you if you want to proceed forward further with it. I chose to take advantage of that opportunity. And what I realized during the sessions, especially with my previous education, was what areas am I forgetting that would help me further address the situation. And as the therapist had mentioned, the importance of me writing more of what was going on as issues continued to increase. And that took me back to an assignment in graduate school where the professor wanted everybody to write 10 pages of what influenced their journey to graduate school. And then the professor had told me upon reading the 10 pages that I gave him that he wanted more. So I gave him another 10 pages or such just because of how much life I've lived along the way and how that would influence me considering the idea of writing the burnt out story. But that also would help me consider the idea of, with this therapist in 2023, me writing out what my experiences were for why I was going to see the therapist. Not only just utilizing those 3 free sessions, which if your company offers free sessions, take advantage of that. Don't let that pass you by because you never know what doors that will additionally open up in your life. What I realized in that was as they mentioned the idea of writing again or writing out the issues I was having is as I was writing out what was going on, I started to realize my biggest problem was the person that I was in a relationship with. Yeah, I didn't know how to best address that situation as I had invested so much money, time, life, just so much that I would not have imagined me saying here today, that in ways it almost felt like a waste. But there's so much I learned from it moving forward that it definitely humbled me in areas I did not know I needed to be humbled in until being where I am now. And I'm grateful for that experience, and I'm grateful for sharing that with you. And there's probably a few more pieces I'm missing here with starting again, but it's just the concept of so much life being lived along the way. Sharing this with you now, and just knowing that I wanted to put this out in a book to share with you, as I did with the Burnt Out Story. What I realized is, just as part 5 of the Burnt Out Story is me living it while writing it simultaneously, the same is such for Starting Again 2025. Me living it simultaneously while consistently advancing parts that I knew were necessary for me to attend, and how I've invited the Holy Spirit to work through me in ways where I'm able to uplift others and to be able to reduce the headaches that youth experience long term. At least lets me know that what I experienced was not for nothing. And at least that provides some relief to know that I tried my best. I put it all on the table, and I know at the end of the day, I I can't say I didn't try. And I will leave you with one difficult lesson upon packing my stuff, which some of my stuff was still over there, that I just said, you know what, you can use this for various parts of your place, instead of me just taking every single thing that I had, because I realized the sooner I got out of that situation, the better off my life was going to be. Even though I knew ahead, or at least I knew that there was going to be additional parts of my life that I had to rebuild moving forward. And it's this. So, as many times as I wanted to slam the door upon putting stuff in the U-Haul trucks, putting stuff in my car, doing multiple trips back and forth, as much as I wanted to slam that door shut, I didn't. And I'm grateful that I didn't slam that door at any time, because it's the echo from the door that gets slammed that you will have to process later on. And I ultimately didn't want to have to deal with any more of that relationship than what I already endured. And the reason why I'm telling you this is that when you go to review the past, you rather make sure when you leave the past, like I left it, you gently close that door. And as you leave, you remind yourself of how gently closing that door is a twofold life lesson. One fold because you are making your exit, but the second fold is because you didn't slam that door, there's no echo that you are going to have to additionally process later. So, later on, let's say today, June 9th, 2025, when I share stories such as this with you, I can share this with the peace in my heart that I review that of my past, where it can rest without any form of irritation or uproar, acknowledge the life lesson, gently close the door as I did back then, except here, when I gently close the door, I do it cognitively. So I gently close the door and I continue moving forward. And with that being said, I appreciate you for being here. I appreciate you for listening. And I welcome you to share if any of this relates to you in any way. And on that note, you have a good night. God bless.